Hello, I'm not sure what possessed me to buy this, but this is the PlayStation 2. Oh no, sorry, it's not. It's the Calix GPON router, or PON router. It's huge, and it looks like an old game console. On the back of it we have a USB port, a factory reset port. If you want to know how to factory reset it, there'll definitely be another video on this channel about how to do that. Have a look at the description for a link. 4 Ethernet ports, 2 ATA or PSTN conversion ports, power socket and power switch. Hidden behind this panel here is the optical connection, which is, in this instance, an angled polished connector, APc SC subscriber connector, which is the larger connector, into a coupler. And on the other side, inside here, is another one of these which goes off to the optic. At the front you've got a power light, broadband light, service light, Wi-Fi 2.4 and 5 GHz, interestingly and nicely a light for each of the Ethernet sockets and the 2 telephone sockets to whether they're configured or on a call, and then the USB. Down the bottom here you've got a light and a button for WPS, for the wireless connection system. Not really anything else on any of the other sides. A lot of ventilation, which is good, and a stand for it to stand on. That stand pushes backwards and reveals the sticker. So if I can tone that down a bit. So it's a Calix GigaCentre 844G-2, an American company, or an American address, San Jose, California. Rated voltage 12 volts, 2.5 amps. And it does have a sticker at the top here with the wireless details and log-on information for changing settings, but that's also on the bottom right of this sticker here as well. The power supply it comes with is that one for the UK, also this one with a Calix sticker on it for the EU. Oops, get that untangled. The EU one is interestingly rated at 12 volts and only 1.5 amps, and the UK one is rated at 12 volts and 2.5 amps. So I'm not really sure why the EU one seems to be far underpowered compared to the UK one, and compared to the spec of the router itself. When you plug this thing in, it takes an absolute age to start up, and I'll let you see what these lights do, and then the next thing you'll see after it's started up will be the web interface of this router, and how you configure settings, how you log into it, where you change the Wi-Fi name and password, etc. But you may feel like you want to skip past this bit, because this power light will flash for a very long time. Then eventually the Wi-Fi lights will come on, and the router will have booted up and is ready to use. Okay, you can see it finally finished flashing its power light and we're ready to go. Sadly, I'm not in an area with full fibre broadband. The other end of the patch lead has a polished connector, not an angled polished connector. The APCs are green and the UPCs, the ultra polished connectors, are blue. So I'm not really sure why an internet provider is mixing and matching APC versus PC. But there we go. That's booted up. Let's go over to the laptop. Okay, so we're over on the router, or sorry, on the computer now, and the default IP address of the router is 192.168.1.1, and the username and password is on the sticker on the side of it, or on the sticker underneath, or not really underneath, but behind the stand that you can move away. So username's admin, and then my unique password. It gives us what looks like a very basic initial screen. We can log out, click on About, which shows you the serial number and the firmware release and its MAC address. Status, which shows you whether the WAN is connected, so the internet side is connected. Some other details again, serial number, software version. Interestingly, an upstream and a downstream, even though it's not connected. Presumably, that was the last speed it was connected to the provider at before it was taken out of use. Set to IP routed, so I guess it also will support stuff like PPPoE and other protocols as well. And we're not connected, so we're not going to see any DNS servers or IP addresses. Devices will probably show, yep, the devices which are connected directly to the router, so stuff that's in your LAN or on your Wi-Fi. Internet, more details about the internet connection, which, as I say, sadly in my case, I don't have any fibre provider to my property, so I can't plug it in to test it or show you what that would look like. Nicely, it will give you the status of each Ethernet port, so you can see what speed each one's connected at. And also details about the wireless and any devices connected to it, and what channel that it's decided to pick. Very interestingly, it shows you the connection tracking table for NAT, so where which computers are trying to connect from where and to where. The routing table, and status about the ALGs and other services that the router runs. Okay, let's go on to Quick Start. It lets us set a static IP address. Also, bearing in mind this router might be locked down to whatever provider it came from in the first place. So there might be some settings that your router shows that mine doesn't, and possibly the other way around, some settings that my router will show that yours won't. Yeah, so you can set your own static DNS servers if you wanted to use OpenDNS or any other DNS provider. A wizard for configuring the wireless network, and also instead of pressing the WPS button on the side of the router, you can also press connect here in the web interface. You can set the time zone. Under wireless you get further settings as well, such as the channel width and channel that the wireless is on, and power level as well, if you wanted it to transmit at a lower power, because it would say you only wanted to cover a very small area. You can change the wireless name, otherwise known as the SSID. Change the password so that it's not the default one on the sticker. You can have your own password. You can set MAC address limiting, which is a very bad way of limiting things to connect to a network. It's trivial to spoof the MAC address of a device, so you're better off having a very good password and making sure that you know who knows that password rather than using MAC address authentication. WMM, which I think is to do with packet scheduling and quality of service, which I'm not going to go into because not particularly helpful or useful. Same kind of settings again for the 5 GHz radio. And the WPS option, so you can enable or disable the button on the router to allow people to connect, and you can trigger WPS without having to push the button on the router. You can do it in the web interface here as well. Under Utilities, you can back up and restore the configuration. Sadly, it looks like it's binary of some sort, and going by the way that I can't see any strings or plain text within that binary, it's probably also encoded or encrypted in some way as well. You can do factory reset from within the web interface and remotely reboot the router through the web interface as well. Web Activity Log supposedly displays a list of the most recently accessed websites. I can't imagine that it works particularly well. Well, certainly when it's not connected it doesn't work, and depending on the method it's using to track website access, so whether it's using DNS entries or intercepting port 80, if it's doing port 80, that's so rarely used these days on the internet that it's not really going to be of any use to anyone. We can do a ping test from the web interface, a trace route, view the system log, which seems to go back quite some time, and the firewall log. Going into advanced, we can do scheduling of devices being able to access the internet. So if you'd connect, say, your child's iPad or laptop to the router, you can select it from the list here and then say days and times of the week where they will be able to get to the internet or not. We do service blocking, which I also expect probably doesn't work particularly well. Certainly none of those services look like they're going to be modern or useful these days. I do new on that. Okay, so it is just TCP or UDP ports that you can block and unblock. Most stuff these days seems to use port 443 for HTTPS. So the granularity of blocking stuff there is going to be quite limited because yeah, most stuff uses 443. If you block 443, then they're not going to be able to get to any website at all. Website blocking is going to be an interesting one because I can't test it. Some routers fail miserably at this. Some routers surprisingly do work. So you type in a website like bbc.co.uk and that would then be potentially blocked, but because, as I say, I don't have a PON-based fibre network in my house, I can't test that to see how good it is or not. IP addressing, you've got DHCP settings, so you can change the IP address of the router and the IP address ranges that it gives out. IPTV DNS suffix, unlikely to be used in the UK at all, so I'm just going to go past that. IPv6 settings. DHCP reservations, so if you have, say, a printer or a CCTV camera that you always want to have the same IP address, but you don't want to configure it as a static IP on that specific device, then you can use this to make sure that the router always gives that device that same IP address. DNS host mapping, that's an interesting one. So I wonder if we can send bbc.co.uk to a different IP address. Well, that looked it up through a different interface. The answer is it doesn't work, but potentially because it's not connected to the internet. But that is what I would expect to happen. Is essentially this is a bit like editing the host file on your computer, but doing it for the whole LAN. Moving on to dynamic DNS, let's see which providers or DynDNS it supports. It looks like it does literally just one provider, DynDNS.com. That would have been okay, except DynDNS.com no longer does any free services. It would be good if they supported no IP and some other providers. There's also an open protocol which allows you to configure it to work with any provider that supports that open protocol. So yeah, unless you're going to pay for DynDNS, this dynamic DNS section in the router is particularly useless. Static routing, so if you had a different router on your network and you needed to send traffic to a particular IP range over that router, you could use the static routing section. Quality of service, sadly I'm not going to be able to test this again because I don't have a live service here, but also it looks like it's quality of service tagging rather than speed limiting of particular devices and IP address pairs or ports. So what this would do is tag down to your ISP what the packet is, whether it's high priority or whether it's VoIP or whatever, and then it would be up to the ISP to take into account that tagging, which I expect a lot of them don't do. Under security, you've got the admin username and password where you can change it. Application forwarding, which is probably using their defaults. No, interesting, there's no defaults there at all. Okay, that might be what I otherwise know as port triggering on other routers. Potentially where it detects traffic on ports and then opens those ports back into other devices automatically, maybe. No, and that looks like port forwarding but by another name. How very strange. Application forwarding forwards the application specified ports to the selected device. But what's the point when you've got port forwarding? Port forwarding allows a remote device to connect to... Okay, port forwarding gives you more granularity. So you can say what source IP addresses can come through to a particular device, but it doesn't really make much sense what the difference is. So if I assign test to there, so that's supposedly port 25 going through to this computer I'm on. Let's try adding a port forward as well. All IP addresses. Can also do port translation, which I guess is quite useful, which the application forwarding doesn't do. And it's allowed me to set that up as well. So, not particularly sure what... Oh, we do have lost port 25 there. Oh no, it is there. Existing rule. Not particularly sure what the difference is between those two, except that port forwarding gives you more granularity on who can connect inbound. Okay, so you then have Firewall. Which has a surprising amount of things already in it. I wonder if those are defaults or there have to be defaults left in there or not, that are shipped with it. How strange. Stealth mode will block WAN pings, so if it's enabled you won't be able to ping the router. DMZ is port forwarding essentially everything through to a single device, so quite often it's used by game developers or console support teams for an easy way of getting rid of customers, because they can just say, oh, just put it into DMZ and it will solve your NAT issues or solve your port forwarding issues. It may do, but it's a sledgehammer to crack a nut. It's a ridiculous way around sending traffic to a device. So unless you really need absolutely every single port to be open to a device, I would never recommend using DMZ. But enabling that and selecting a device or filling in an IP address on your network, any traffic that hits your router that is uninvited will get passed on to that game console or that device that you've selected here. Universal plug and play, which is automatic port forwarding, which is helpful for games and for torrents and some other things, can be switched on and off here. Also shows you the status of any existing port forwards that have already been automatically set up. That's quite good. A lot of routers don't give you any information about that. If you want security, I recommend turning off UPnP because it will prevent random devices and random software within your network or your computer from opening up ports without you knowing. This is an unusual one, not expecting to see that here. We've got an option called ARP Spoofing, with no further information, and it's not even clear whether the apply button is working. Yeah, it is making a change. Or is it? Yep. How's it? Unusual. Gives no further details as to what that is supposed to mean or do. So I have absolutely no idea. Never seen it on any other router before, and I'm not sure what that's supposed to be doing here. I wonder if it's meant to be ARP spoofing protection or something, but anyway. Remote GUI or GUI is so you can change settings if you're not at home or at the office and you wanted to be able to visit the IP address of the router and log into it to make changes to the router without having to remote control a computer within the network or be physically at that location. STP is spanning tree protocol, and that's supposed to stop you creating network loops. So if you have two ports plugged into each other on the LAN, or you have switches downstream which also support STP, you could have those connected using two of the LAN ports. So if one of them gets unplugged or goes wrong, it carries on. So could be useful. I rarely see it used in the wild, but interesting again that the router supports it. So there we go. That's all the things which this router supports. There are some settings, like the WAN settings, which are hidden by the ISP who configured or supplied this router. I will see if I can unlock those. If I do, there'll be a video in the description which will show you how I did so, if I've managed to do that. Hopefully this video has been helpful to you. If it has, it would be really helpful to me if you wouldn't mind subscribing to my YouTube channel. You don't need to have video notifications switched on, but the subscriber numbers really do help. Thank you very much.